What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and this video, I want to look back at Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. Try to celebrate, I believe it's actually the 25th anniversary of this game, this upcoming November, a little bit early. But what I did here is I did the same thing I did for Spyro 1, which I think turned 25 years old last year, is I just played the Reignited trilogy. So I do want to kind of make that known up front that I did do, the remastered, remake, whatever you want to call it, version of it. But I got a lot to say because it's been a long time since I've played any Spyro game. I mean, if you minus last year when I did the first game, I grew up primarily on Crash, and Spyro kind of came secondary. But I think Spyro is an incredible franchise. I think I called the first game like it is one of the best, if not maybe the most ultimate collect-a-thon-y type games of all time, which obviously if you don't know what that means, you are going around and you are picking up everything under the sun. And it's simple to a degree, but there's some sort of fun, element to it. I think that's what the first game captured so well. This game, I actually think, turns everything up to 11. It's not a perfect game, but because I don't really remember myself even, I played at least the first 3 Spyro games. I think I probably jumped off of it after that. I think there's a couple that I have never touched before. I don't remember myself playing Spyro 2, so this, in a way, was just a breath of fresh air to, let myself get back into the franchise. And I think this game does a lot of things extremely well. Not a perfect game, but I think, to say it early, much better than the first game. I think by a lot. So one thing you immediately notice, and again, we're looking at the remaster remake, but when I say presentation, I'm talking about just the product in general compared to the first game, regardless of the, the remaster quality. The presentation and the attention to that in this game, miles above the last game. Now, in the last game, obviously, you're freeing a lot of dragons, right? So you go up and you activate them, and you get a little bit of a cutscene. And I would say cutscene because I do think that they took that concept and they expanded upon it all the way in this game. You have a couple major story moments where you get major cutscenes that set up the game. And then also in every single map or location that you go in, you get a setup. And the setup largely doesn't have like voice acting or anything, but it sets up what's going on, some of the like putting down a certain species. You get that with all of these levels, basically, Ripto and his minions kind of taking over each area, and you see the neglect or they're forcing them to work against their will, whatever it might be, or they're attacking them, or whatever it is of this different species in the different worlds. And that's the setup cutscene. And then when you leave and you kind of liberate each setting, which I do kind of think is cool, right? Like you go in and you see this oppressed kind of nature that these things or people or whatever are living in, and then you solve their issue, right? You complete the main task, and then you leave, and then you get a cutscene showing how the tables have turned, right? Now all of a sudden, the people that were being oppressed, now they are the oppressors, and they're the ones using the enemies as kind of their workforce. So I think that's just very clever. I think it adds quite a bit, again, in terms of, well, actually, even the way I described it, it kind of adds to like the world building, because that is something that I think this game has a lot more than the first game. There's more characters, whether it's side characters or whatever. You feel like you're kind of a bigger part to like the system or to, your friends and allies, right? But also, like, because Ripto comes in, and it happens very fast, right? Like, Ripto comes in, he smells that there's no dragons, and he says, okay, we're taking over. And it happens within, like, a quarter of a second, right? There's all of that stuff processed in his head. So, it is very, cartoonish, right? Like, how it kind of gets started. But I do think having those cutscenes adds to the world where he's invading and he's taking over, and there's a reason why you're defeating him is because everything that was a certain way is now, out of sync and just in a very bad situation. So I love the opening, closing cutscenes. I love the main story moments. I think it's a very much more well-rounded game in terms of how it presents the world, the story, the characters, all of that stuff. I think the presentation of that is a lot better. In terms of, the combat and how everything else goes, I also think it's a better game. This game starts to introduce a little bit more. The first game has time elements to it, and there goes to the replayability of really all of these games, right? But with this game, they really start to introduce more power-ups, right? So you're going to have to defeat a certain amount of enemies to unlock a power-up kind of location. And that location, you got a 50-50 shot if you even need it for the main thing, but you're definitely going to need it for the side quests, we'll call them, in each mission. So they introduced that. And that really, I think, starts to build out that the gameplay is a lot better and it's just more detailed in this game. This game puts you, into each of these individual maps. You have an end goal. You have an end, kind of token that you're collecting. But then, and this is where I actually, this is a lot of games back in this era. It's something that I don't like. You have your collectibles, right? Your orbs. And these orbs, you need a certain amount of them every so often, including the very, very end of the game. And the very end of the game requires you to have quite a few orbs. And if you're like me, I actually thought I was collecting them kind of in a fine nature, a fine time period. Little did I know. I mean, obviously I knew that I was missing some here and there. You need to get quite a few of them. So I had to backtrack. I had to go back and say, okay, what of these side missions, that you could collect something from, what wasn't I doing? What was I incapable or whatever? And I will say, because I think I mentioned the first game is not difficult in the slightest. Maybe like the final boss battle is a little tricky compared to the rest of the game, but it's really not a hard game. It is, again, the joy of just collecting things. I haven't really talked about that in this game, but this game has all of that. This game has, at its core, simplicity, where you are going around. The enemies are very easy to take out, right? Most of them are just one hit, kind of eliminations we'll call. Some of them are a little bit more complex, right? Maybe they'll have shields, and some of the maps work kind of against fire and things like that. So you have to either use your headbutt or charge or use your fire, maybe sometimes use a combination of both. It gets a little bit more clever, but at the end of the day, the enemies are generally simple. It makes you think here and there. And you can go through most of the game. Now, I do say most because you actually can't get through all of it until you take it very seriously. You can get through most of this game simply going around, doing your collectathon, and it is still a blast. It's one of those games where, because actually a lot of those cutscenes don't have voice acting, the sound effects are really cool. And I mean, it's a visually beautiful game, at least the remaster remake. I mean, you could like listen to something on your phone, you could do a podcast, you could do music, and kind of just have this game. You have those things in the background, and you have this game just as a collectathon type game. And I think that is, again, at its core, what made the first game very special, what makes this game very special. But this game adds, and again, I don't remember like what it was like when I was 3. Well, actually, I didn't even start playing games maybe until I was like 4 or 5. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old me playing these games. But there is that replayability. There is that thing where, this game can take you 4 or 5 hours, but in order to actually get through the whole, to really experience it, you are going to have to get quite good, because some of those side things that they put into these levels, they're no laughing matter. They can require accuracy. They can require, like I said, oftentimes they require something with those power-ups, right? The map kind of helps you out too, because it'll show you certain things. I think this game does a lot of what the first game did, again, in terms of that simplicity, and then adds the cleverness. But also does add, I will say, a little bit of frustration. This is coming from, I think, a seasoned gaming veteran, maybe one that hasn't played Spyro like 1,000 times like some other people, but, this is a game that if you want to get through it, you're going to have to really pay attention, because, some of the entry-level orbs, that you get are not that difficult. Some of the more advanced ones, some of the later ones, yeah, like you're going to have to do some pretty crazy stuff and some stuff that I'll say this, like, I'm trying to like get at something that I don't think I'm doing a good job of explaining. What I can appreciate to a degree, but also think it's probably the game's biggest weakness. The separation between enjoying the game and just kind of going through it as a collectathon thing, to that point, to the point where you are taking it very seriously and you're collecting some of the hardest orbs in the game. There is a big gap there. Now, again, like, is that all that different from other games in the realm? Like, Crash Bandicoot is a pretty hard game, especially if you're going for 100% completion. If you're pushing that game to its limit, it's going to push you to your limit. I just think, in the case of Crash, if you're just going through it at a casual pace, that difficulty is higher to begin with than a Spyro. I do think the gap between Spyro of being, just a casual collectathon type thing all the way to the most advanced, that is a bigger gap than Crash, which I think is kind of already naturally harder. And then, yeah, when it goes insane, it also goes insane, right? But I think that gap is bigger with Spyro. And I can appreciate it to a degree because it's like, oh, it has complexity, right? There's ways of, or there's opportunity basically to play the same level, and you play it once, you just casually go through. Then you're playing and you're taking it very, very seriously. You're being timed, maybe even mentally, right? Maybe you only have a power up for so long and you have to use it to do something to get an orb. There's a lot of those type things in it. There's also diversity, I would say. We haven't really talked about map structure. There's a lot of different environments. They're based off of certain things. So there might be one where you're kind of in like a farmer type field situation. There could be one where you're activating to make everything go underwater. And, it plays with those elements. Maybe it will introduce an underwater type thing, and then you'll have an entire mission where it is underwater. I talk about the enemies. I think that's a very, very smart thing this game does, is it plays with the enemy variety. And sometimes, a thing that's been working the whole game isn't going to work so much. You'll have enemies where you have to take them out a certain way. Maybe you have to come at them from the back or the side, or again, maybe you'll have to charge into them first, then breathe fire, or reverse, breathe fire, and then charge them. I think that's really and that's just something I don't think the first game really had all that much of. You also have the time trials that are kind of off the beaten path, right, where you get to soar through the sky and collect all those things. Man, I try to get perfect scores and try to get all of them, right? And holy dear Jesus, it's a learning curve. I absolutely do appreciate, like, when the game turns it up to 11, the fundamentals are there, and that's very important for any of these games, right? Where maybe it's an underrated kind of feature. They also have to be good as a casual thing, but the gameplay there, I mean, it's simple, but the gameplay there needs to be able to transfer itself to a harder situation or scenario, right? When it throws something at you, you got to feel like what the game gives you is enough, and the game does it. So I did have a blast, and in a lot of ways, I enjoyed this game more than the first game. I would say just the one major weakness this game has is right at the end, literally to get to Ripto, right? There's a blockage, and the game literally stops you at its tracks. And again, it kind of does it here and there throughout the game. But I felt it was actually kind of natural, where I always had the required materials. Either I had the money required, right, to unlock a bridge, or, I would have enough of the collectibles where you would go to them and say, hey, you need certain amount to get through. And I already would have it, so it kind of would skip that part. That's how I progressed through the whole game. And then you get to the very end, and it's like, oh man, I thought I was actually collecting quite a bit of stuff, and I wasn't even close. I had to go back. I had to get like 15 or so orbs, maybe even more, that I didn't have. And I thought I was collecting at a very fine rate. So the game does turn it up at the very end, I think kind of unfairly so, but I definitely enjoyed my time. And I can tell you, at least in the 2024 perspective, playing these games in back-to-back years, number one, great franchise. It still needs the fourth game, as we've been saying for so long. But number two, two definitely is a step above one. I remember one pretty vividly. I remember having one. Don't know where the case went, or the manual, disc, any of that stuff. But I definitely had 1, 2, and 3. I know I played it. I don't know. Maybe I even played it in the wrong order at the time. Again, Crash was my thing. Then I kind of graduated to like the Sly Cooper, and Spyro was always there, but always kind of in the background. But playing it the way I am now, I can appreciate, I think, even more, and get me even more excited. It really shouldn't even be that hard to get a 4th Spyro game, if we're all being honest. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.